Hello and welcome back to Tokyo Ghoul Invoke. Today we're going to go over team building and the battle system. Now I would go over unit building as well, however I believe unit building is a little too simplistic to talk about. They took out all of the diversity and complexity. All you really have to do is you level up your unit's main level, you increase their percentage with either dupes or resonance pills, and you feed them these items here to increase their weapon level. All of this will power up your unit. There's nothing super complex about it. It's just farming up and getting the materials you need to do it. So overall, the only complexities would be individually on a unit by unit basis. You can decide whether or not you want to give them pills or you want to give them their actual dupes rather than selling their dupes to get more pills. So I'm going to leave unit building there. What we're going to focus on is the important aspect of the game, putting together a cohesive team. And for an example, we're going to utilize the team I built here. Now, one very important thing to note when building a team, units like this Minami here, who give themselves a buff when they attack, when they use their skill, cannot receive the buffs from support units like Toka here. So what this Toka does is she gives a 1.5 times attack and defense buff for 3 turns to all allies, along with a 15% regeneration per turn. This Minami, when she uses her skill, gives herself a 1.5 times attack buff for 3 turns, and then she attacks one enemy 6 times for 1.2 times damage with a -3 durability. What this means, her 1.5 times buff from her skill will take up the exact same buff slot as this Toka's buff. And rather than multiplying them together like they did before the renewal, they instead will overwrite each other. So if one unit gets a buff from their own skill, a support unit's buff will then overwrite that unit's buff, and vice versa. Whichever buff happened later is the buff that stays. The buff that happened earlier goes away entirely. So support units cannot buff units that give themselves a buff with their skill. Thus, if you're going to run a support unit on your team, you have to make sure that the team can cohesively utilize and take advantage of that support unit's skill. Otherwise, you have a wasted team slot. So normally this would mean that this Minami shouldn't be here. However, there is a reason I'm running her rather than another unit. So awakening type units like this Kaneki, even though they awaken and they do get a buff when they awaken, this buff, unlike buffs that happen when you use your skill, does not get overwritten by support unit buffs. Instead, it multiplies together with the support unit's buff to give an overall percentage buff, or overall multiplicative buff. This only works, however, if the awakening unit does not also, on their awaken skill, give themselves an attack buff, which this Kaneki does not. This means that he can utilize support units much better than any other units, most other units in the game, I should say. Because he gives himself a buff when he awakens that stacks with the support unit buff, and he does not overwrite the support unit buff with his awakened skill. On top of that, he actually has a 2-turn defensive decrease on enemies when he attacks them, which makes it just increases his damage all that much more. On top of that, the next unit I have in the next slot is Yamori, who is an AoE unit that does not give himself an attack buff when he uses his skill. Underneath Yamori, I also have Tsukiyama, who is again an AoE unit that does not give himself an attack buff when utilizing his skill. So these two can both utilize Toka's buff, as can this Kaneki. Now, the reason for the Minami being on this team, even though she can't utilize the buff, is because the unit we want to get the buff the most out of everyone on our team is this Kaneki. Which means that when we're going to use the buff skill, this Kaneki needs to be in our front row every time. Every single time. So she will always be in the back row. And Toka does not give her buff to the units in the back row. It only goes to the units in the front row. to the vanguard, as they're called. Which means Minami, since she should always be in the back row, will not ever worry about not getting that buff. Because she gives herself her own buff. And that's why we utilize a unit like Minami here. Now, it doesn't have to be specifically Minami. You could use any other Ghoul unit that gives themselves a buff, or even an Investigator unit if you want to use a mixed team that gives themselves a buff in this slot. Now, the focus of this Ghoul team I've built is heavy AoE damage. So we've got 2 AoEs on this side over here. We've got a strong AoE on this side, but we do have 2 single target hitters in Minami and this Kaneki. This Kaneki is very interesting because what he does is he mimics Toka if you've already used Toka's support skill. You can switch her out for this Kaneki, and this Kaneki will perfectly mimic her and pretend like he is her for himself. When he attacks, he gives himself the 1.5 times attack buff and a 10% healing skill per turn for 3 turns, and then he single target attacks an enemy 7 times for 1.4 times damage, effectively allowing him to take over Toka's slot while these 2 units on either side, be it on this side, be it one of those 2, and then this guy on this side, already have Toka's support buff. Of course, when Toka's support buff goes away, you switch back, and you get Toka out there to attack again. So that is a team structure that works. Now, a team structure that does not utilize supports is this one. This team has 0 support units, and its main focus is raw damage, which means there's no build-up, there's no contention. You just get your skill, you go in, and you slap the enemy really hard. The only unit that doesn't quite fit that paradigm on the team is this Almond, and the only reason that I use him, despite him not fitting that setting, is because he's insanely good. Even though he's slow, once he's awakened, he is probably the highest damaging unit in the game. So there's just no good reason for me not to have him on my team. So this team, every unit gives themselves a buff other than that Almond. Juzo 1.75 times, Arima 2 times. This Juzo actually does not give himself a buff, but he's here as a debuffer. He debuffs the enemy attack by 0.7 times, which is very good for survivability. Plus, he's 100% because he was a free Juzo unit. I plan to get him up to weapon level 10 in order to utilize his 20% guard, and his high durability and defense as a free unit. He also has decent AP. So this Akira, also gives herself a buff and hits decently well. She is, I believe, I'm not sure if she's AoE or not. I would have to double check on that. But I know she's fairly good at breaking enemies. Whereas this Juzo is most certainly AoE and does really good damage as an AoE without needing to build up or get support buffs. So this is what I would call a non-supported team, I would say an independent team, and this is a support-focused team. You can also just build a random team, put together whatever you want. It should work for the most part, because most of the events are pretty easy. However, for bosses, I would say you should go for either a support... I would say the best for bosses is honestly this style of team. A team that is not reliant on a support unit that can just attack and attack and attack without caring too much about whether or not they have the proper buffs. But you can, if you want to go for a slightly longer, more dragged out fight that has high burst damage once supports are active, you can utilize a team like this instead. So that's the basics of team building. Now we're going to go ahead and show off a battle. Skip these animations. I can't show you off against the owls, unfortunately, so what we're going to do is we're going to take on a stage I need to farm, and we're going to use each team one time. So we're going to start with the ghouls. And I want to show you, the ghouls I use are support-focused ghouls, obviously. You can use selfish ghouls, I would say, or independent ghouls, but I like the support team a lot. So we're going to start by making sure Toka gets her skill out first. So you just keep hitting her, keep tapping her. Once she's out of AP, you start tapping up another unit, preferably Kaneki because he needs his skill. Now that they're both ready, go ahead and awaken. Use Toka's skill to get the buff. Awaken Kaneki. You got that done early. Now you can go ahead and start using Yamori to attack because you want to get his skill too for the final phase, I should say. So now you're going to want to get Toka's skill back as fast as you can because you want to make sure it has permanent uptime. And now we have Kaneki's skill back. We don't need to worry too much about missing out on it. We don't have to worry about attacking with him, I should say, at this point, because we already have his skill. So now what we're going to do is we're going to aim at one of the grunts. If it'll change, there we go. She's got her skill. Now we're going to get Yamori his skill. Alright, so our buff is still active. You can actually tell with Toka because her healing lasts the same amount as the buff. So we're going to start with Yamori. Yamori should do pretty good damage and almost, if not break, every single person. Now he's broken the enemy. We'll watch Kaneki's damage. Kaneki has the support. He's going to reduce defense, and you're going to see some decent damage coming out of him. And this is essentially how you're going to want the team to work. Your main rotation, or not rotation, but your mainstay team would be those guys. Obviously, this event wasn't too difficult. It was only an A-rank farming event, nothing too special. So there's really, I can't show you all the nuances of the team. But in the next one, I'll take a little more time to properly show off the battle system. That was mostly just to show off how you would generally run a support team. Alright, now, like I said, we're going to try to go over the actual battle system, and we'll bring my investigator team for this. So the battle system has changed minutely. I would say it's mostly the same overall. You have each character has a set number of attacks. They attack a number of times. You break the enemy to get your skill faster, and you can switch with your back row units. So we're going to start by showing what breaking is. As you can see, the AP numbers are a lot larger than they used to be. It used to be you had 3 types. Each type had their own set AP amount. And however much AP they had depended, it depended on their type, obviously. I just said that. Sorry. But you would generally use the units, the breaker type units, because even though they only had 1 AP, they only had 1 attack, they had the the highest break stat, which meant they could get the breaks fastest. The break stat no longer exists in this game. Breaking depends entirely on your attack and the number of attacks you can do. So units like Juzo, who have decently high attack, and 10 attacks are going to be your best breakers. Arima is also fairly good, 1600, 9 attacks. Now to show switching, you can no longer switch any unit with any unit. As you can see, the almonds only switch with each other. This Juzo can only switch with Arima, so on and so forth. And you still only have 3 switches total. So, one thing to note is there is a typing wheel now. There is the red, there's the green, there's the blue, and then there's the black and the yellow. The names for these types, Almond is green, he is speed. Red, the almond in the back, is strength. Blue, the Akira over here, is intelligence. Yellow, the Suzuya right here, is light. And the Suzuya on the other side is dark, purple. So purple, dark, and light are opposing. So light units will do more damage to dark units and vice versa. However, this unit is a free unit, and notice he does not have very high attack. So it seems, I would say that the bonus to damage is probably roughly 30% to 40%. I'm just attacking while I talk. Ignore that. But for the other triangle, for the 3 types, speed is strong against intelligence, intelligence is strong against strength, and strength is strong against speed. So from there, you have your AP, you have your breaking, and when you break the enemy, you actually completely refill the team's AP to their max AP values. So like, for example, if I sit here and I attack all these times with this Juzo, notice his AP 0. I broke, now my AP's back to 10. That's essentially how you do, how you can get your skills the best you can, as fast as you can, I mean. You break the enemy more, and they get your AP back to do more attacks, which allows you to get more skill charge. And against broken enemies, you actually do get more skill gain. So another thing to note about the units is for awakening type units like this Almond, if you swipe up like you do for everyone else, they actually have a secondary skill. Let me click here. Here we go. So if you notice, this skill is not the same awakening skill I was showing you earlier. In order to see their awakening, in order to use their awakening skill, you have to swipe down. Otherwise, you'll be using their main skill, I should say. Let's go ahead and finish these guys off with Juzo's AoE. And move on to the boss. One other thing I should say to note about awakening type units. Once they've awakened, they gain a ton more SP than they did before awakening. So if you attack a broken unit with an awakened unit, as you'll see, he almost fully gained his entire skill gauge from just that. So now I've got his full skill gauge, and I can utilize his awakened skill. Once awakened, an awakening unit does not have a secondary skill. They can't reawaken. Notice his skill came back right away, so I can use it again immediately. That's one of the biggest advantages of awakening units, is they can spam their skills once they're awakened. All in all, that's essentially all there really is to say about the battle system. The complexities of the battle system generally come with how your team is and the event you're fighting against. And that's about all I have for today as well. Or for this video, I should say. So this is where I'm going to cut it off, and I will see you guys next time.